My name is Cedrick Sampang, and I'm 27 years old, working as a mechanic in this small farming town where everyone knows everyone else's business. The morning sun painted St. Augustine's church in golden light, streaming through stained glass windows like God's own spotlight on the polished wooden pews. I stood outside watching families arrive in their Sunday best, the sound of organ music drifting through open doors. My grandfather Elias moved slowly up the church steps with his worn wooden cane, his 83-year-old frame carrying the deliberate grace of a man who'd spent decades building things meant to last. His suit was older than my father's car, but it was clean and pressed, worn with quiet dignity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Come on, Dad, we're going to be late," my father Roland called out, his voice carrying that particular edge it always had around Grandpa. Roland stood near the entrance in his expensive navy suit, silver watch catching sunlight as he checked the time. Everything about him screamed success. The pressed clothes, polished shoes, the way he held himself like he owned whatever room he entered. My mother Marissa smoothed down her dress, offering polite smiles to other guests. She'd spent an hour perfecting her appearance, and it showed. Not a hair out of place, makeup applied with surgical precision. But I caught how her eyes darted nervously between Grandpa and the arriving families for my cousin Amelia's wedding. As we approached the front pews reserved for family, I naturally began guiding Grandpa toward the second row where we'd always sat during services. That's when my father stepped between us. "He'll sit in the back," Roland whispered, his words sharp as broken glass. "That's where he belongs." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "You heard me." Roland's jaw was tight, eyes scanning the congregation. "It's better for everyone this way." Before I could argue, my mother appeared at my elbow, her fingers digging into my arm. "Not today, Cedrick. Please, don't make a scene. It's Amelia's day." I looked at my grandfather, who stood quietly listening to this exchange about him as if he weren't even there. His weathered face showed no surprise, only deep sadness that settled in the lines around his eyes. "It's an old family matter," Marissa continued in that diplomatic tone she used to shut down conversations. "You wouldn't understand." But I understood perfectly. This was about image, about my parents' embarrassment over Grandpa's humble lifestyle. They saw him, with his worn clothes, slow gait, simple way of speaking, as a reminder of roots they wanted to forget. "It's all right, Cedrick," Elias said softly, his voice carrying gentle acceptance I'd heard 1,000 times before. "I understand." He didn't argue or protest. He simply adjusted his grip on his cane and began the slow walk toward the back, past families who'd known him his whole life, past the community he'd served for decades, to take a seat in the last pew like some unwelcome stranger. I wanted to follow him, but Marissa's grip tightened and Roland's stern look warned against causing what he'd call a disturbance. So I sat in the second pew, back rigid with anger and shame, as the ceremony began. Pastor Jonathan Reeves guided Amelia and her fiancé through traditional rituals with practiced grace. The congregation followed along, standing for hymns, bowing heads during prayers, murmuring amen at appropriate moments. I tried focusing on the service, but my attention kept drifting to the back of the church where Grandpa sat alone, the knowledge sitting in my chest like a stone. Pastor Reeves was halfway through the exchange of vows when something unexpected happened. He paused mid-sentence, eyes scanning the congregation before settling on something in the back pews. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the wedding party waited. "I apologize," Pastor Reeves said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, "but I feel compelled to pause for a moment." A murmur rippled through the congregation. This wasn't part of the program. Beside me, my parents stiffened. Pastor Reeves stepped around the altar, eyes still fixed on the back of the church. We're gathered here in this beautiful sanctuary, and I realize many of you may not know the full story of how this sacred space came to be. My heart began to pound. Something in the pastor's tone suggested this wasn't going to be a simple historical note. Would you please stand, Mr. Elias Sampang? Pastor Reeves asked, his voice warm but firm. The silence that followed was deafening. Heads turned throughout the church, searching for my grandfather. From the corner of my eye, I saw my father's jaw clench. In the back pew, slowly and with obvious reluctance, Grandpa rose to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Reeves continued, you're looking at the man whose hands built much of what you see around you. The altar where this young couple is exchanging vows, crafted by Elias Sampang. These pews where you're sitting, also his work. The beautiful wooden cross behind me, his design. The murmur grew louder. I felt my breath catch. I'd known Grandpa was a carpenter, but I'd never realized the extent of his contribution to the church. Pastor Reeves wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket and pulled out old documents. I discovered these in the church archives just last week. Receipts, letters, and bank records from 30 years ago when this church was facing foreclosure. The word foreclosure shocked the congregation. St. Augustine's was the heart of our community. The idea that it had once been in danger was almost unthinkable. When the bank was ready to seize this building, when our congregation couldn't raise enough money to save our spiritual home, one man stepped forward. One man mortgaged his farm, the land his own father had left him, to pay off the church's debts. My hands began to tremble. I stared at Pastor Reeves, then turned to look back at my grandfather, who stood with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. That man was Elias Sampang, Pastor Reeves announced. This church exists today because of his sacrifice. Somewhere in the middle of the church, someone began to clap. The applause spread until the entire congregation was on their feet, applauding my grandfather. All except my parents, who sat frozen like statues carved from ice. Outside in the churchyard, the change was dramatic. Instead of polite but distant nods Grandpa usually received, people were approaching him directly. "Mr. Sampang," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thick with emotion, "I had no idea. My Heralds and I have been coming to that church for 40 years, and we never knew." Deacon Harold appeared at Grandpa's elbow, his usually reserved demeanor cracked with obvious guilt. "Elias, I owe you an apology. We all do. You should have been sitting up front today." I watched this unfold with mixed emotions. Pride in my grandfather's dignity as he accepted belated thanks. Anger that it had taken Pastor Reeves's public revelation for people to see what had been there all along. But my father had other concerns. "Cedrick," Roland's voice was tight as he pulled me aside, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About this spectacle, about encouraging this kind of attention. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" "Embarrassing?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Dad, did you hear what Pastor Reeves said? Grandpa saved this church."
"He made a foolish financial decision 30 years ago," Roland snapped back, "and now it's being paraded around like some grand gesture. Do you know what people are going to think? That our family couldn't manage our money properly. He gave a handout, Dad. He saved the church. He mortgaged prime real estate for a building that generates no income." Roland's voice was getting louder. "Do you know what that land would be worth today if he'd been smart about it?" Not everything is about money. Everything is about money, Cedrick. That's how the world works. And right now, your grandfather's little moment of glory is making our entire family look like we can't take care of our own affairs. Marissa appeared at Roland's shoulder. Your father's right. This kind of attention isn't good for anyone. People will start asking questions about family finances. Maybe they should ask those questions, I said quietly. The silence that followed was loaded with decades of unspoken tension. Roland's face flushed red. You need to remember who your family is, he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. You need to remember where your loyalties lie. That old man won't be around forever, but we will be. The drive to Grandpa's farmhouse took me through winding back roads, past fields of corn and soybeans stretching toward the horizon. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, and the air held that heavy, electric feeling before a good downpour. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I found him in his workshop, a converted barn behind the main house, where he'd spent countless hours crafting furniture and teaching a young boy the difference between screwdrivers. The space smelled of wood shavings and machine oil, familiar scents that brought back childhood memories. I wondered when you'd come by, Grandpa said without looking up from sanding a small jewelry box. Figured that conversation with your parents didn't go too well. I pulled up an old stool. Why didn't you ever tell me about the mortgage, about saving the church? Grandpa paused, setting down the jewelry box and turning to face me. His eyes held a mixture of sadness and gentle amusement. What was I supposed to say? That I once did something good? Good deeds don't need a spotlight, Cedrick. They're not meant to be parlor tricks you pull out to impress people. But Dad always made it sound like you were irresponsible with money. Grandpa chuckled without humor. Your father sees the world through dollar signs. Always has. He looks at that mortgage and sees a lost investment. I looked at it as a community that needed help. He moved to pour coffee from a pot in the corner, the strong black brew he'd been drinking since before I was born. As he spoke, my eyes wandered around the workshop, taking in the familiar chaos of tools and projects. That's when I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. A locked wooden box sitting on a high shelf, its dark walnut surface polished to a deep shine. What's in the box, Grandpa? He followed my gaze, and something shifted in his expression. Just old papers, nothing important. If it's nothing important, why is it locked? Grandpa studied my face for a long moment. Some things are meant for the right hands at the right time. What does that mean? Instead of answering, he walked to a window overlooking the fields he'd worked most of his adult life. Storm clouds were closer now, first drops of rain spattering against glass. Your father came by last week, Grandpa said quietly. Wanted to talk about my estate planning. Asked a lot of questions about what I intended to leave behind. My blood ran cold. What did you tell him? I told him what I've always told him, that a man's worth isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he gives away. Grandpa turned back to me, expression serious. But I don't think he heard me. I don't think he ever hears me. I won't let anyone forget what you've done, I said finally. Grandpa smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. I don't need recognition, Cedrick, but I appreciate the sentiment. He moved toward the locked box, touching its surface with one weathered finger. Promise me something, he said without turning around. Anything. Promise me that whatever happens, you'll remember that some things are more valuable than money. Some things can't be bought or sold or inherited. They can only be earned. The next morning, Pastor Reeves's wife, Lydia, appeared at my shop doorway, holding a manila folder with a troubled expression. Mr. Sampang,
I wonder if I might have a word with you about your grandfather. We sat in my small office area, and she opened the folder, revealing photocopied documents. Jonathan didn't tell the whole story yesterday. He felt it wasn't his place to reveal everything, but after seeing how your grandfather was treated, she shook her head. I think you deserve to know. The first document was a bank statement from 1993, showing a substantial withdrawal from my grandfather's account. This is the mortgage he took on his farm, Lydia explained. But look at this. She pulled out church records showing that Grandpa hadn't just paid off the debt, he'd also funded major structural repairs that weren't required by the bank. The total was staggering, far more than needed simply to avoid foreclosure. Your grandfather essentially rebuilt that church from the ground up, Lydia continued, showing me letters from suppliers, architectural sketches in Grandpa's handwriting, even photographs of the church during renovation. But there's something else, she said, voice dropping. Something that doesn't quite add up. She showed me bank records of regular deposits into a church maintenance account through the late 1990s. Small but consistent payments from my grandfather. These payments stopped in 2001, but the account balance shows a large final deposit that same year. Then the account was closed, and the money disappeared from the church's official records. I looked at the numbers, my mind racing. The final deposit was substantial, enough to fund significant improvements or create an emergency reserve. Disappeared how? That's what we're trying to figure out. Jonathan found references to the account in old board meeting minutes, but no record of where the money went. It's as if someone deliberately removed it from the books. I thought about the locked wooden box in Grandpa's workshop, his cryptic comments about the right hands at the right time. Mrs. Reeves, do you think my grandfather might know where that money went? She studied my face, then nodded slowly. I think your grandfather knows exactly where that money went. And I think he's been waiting for the right person to ask the right questions. There's one more thing, Lydia said, closing the folder. Yesterday, several people approached Jonathan about forming a committee to properly honor your grandfather's contributions. But it also means people are going to start asking more questions about the church's finances. If there's something he's been keeping private, it might not stay private much longer. She paused at the door. Your grandfather is a good man, Cedrick. Whatever he's keeping to himself, I'm sure he had good reasons. But sometimes good men need help protecting the things they care about. After she left, I sat alone staring at the documents. The pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together, but I still couldn't see the complete picture. What I could see was that my grandfather had been carrying secrets for decades, secrets involving money, the church, and decisions he'd made to protect something or someone. And I was starting to suspect that the locked wooden box in his workshop held the key to understanding it all. That afternoon, I returned to the farmhouse through gathering storm clouds. The conversation with Lydia had left me with more questions than answers, and I knew only Grandpa could provide them. I found him staring at the locked wooden box, as if it were speaking to him in a language only he could understand. "You came back sooner than I expected," he said without turning around. "Mrs. Reeves showed me documents about missing church money, money that came from you." I leaned forward, studying his face. "I think you know where it went." Grandpa sighed, a sound carrying the weight of decades. "I suppose it's time." He rose carefully and lifted the wooden box from the shelf. The walnut surface was carved with intricate angels and crosses, all rendered with masterful skill. "I made this box 40 years ago," he said, pulling a brass key from his pocket. "What's inside has been waiting for the right moment." The lock clicked open. Inside, cushioned in faded velvet, lay bank statements, architectural sketches marked St. Augustine's East Wing expansion, and a small brass key tagged St. Augustine, East Wing Storage. The missing money isn't missing. It's waiting. I studied the bank statements showing substantial amounts. In 2001, the church board planned an expansion, but the economy turned and plans got shelved. I'd already set aside money for the project. When they canceled it, I had a choice: give the money back or wait. Wait for what? For when the church would really need it, not just want something nice. His eyes met mine. That money has been earning interest for over 20 years, waiting for someone who understands true stewardship. I picked up the brass key. What does this open? A storage room in the church's east wing, behind the old choir space. Inside, there's a wall safe with trust account information, architectural plans, and financial projections. Thunder rumbled overhead, and we heard a car door slam. Roland's sedan sat in the driveway. "Put this somewhere safe," Grandpa whispered, sliding the brass key into my hand. "Don't let him know what we've discussed." Roland stepped into the workshop without knocking, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the closed box and our serious expressions. "Well, isn't this cozy? Father and son having a heart-to-heart." Marissa appeared behind him, her greeting polite but cold. "Hello, Elias. Cedrick." "What brings you out in this weather?" Grandpa asked calmly. "We need to talk about yesterday's performance and conversations I've been hearing around town. Conversations about money, about church finances, and your historical contributions. People are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" Grandpa's voice remained steady. "The kind involving lawyers and accountants. The kind that make people wonder about estate planning and financial transparency." The brass key in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When you make grand gestures in public, people start wondering about other gestures you might have made in private. They start asking about assets, accounts, money that might have been moved around without proper oversight. "Misallocated?" I stood up, anger flaring. "He saved that church, Dad." Did he? Or did he make questionable financial decisions we're only now understanding? He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. "I've been contacted by 3 church board members today. They want to form a committee to review the church's financial history, particularly private donations from the 1990s and early 2000s. They're calling it a heritage audit. Very thorough, very comprehensive. What they're really doing is looking for irregularities from money that might have been moved around without proper oversight." I watched Grandpa's face, saw his jaw tighten. "And you think I've done something improper?" "I think you've been making financial decisions for decades without consulting anyone, playing fast and loose with substantial amounts, and now our entire family will be scrutinized." "Since when do you care about family?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "You made him sit in the back yesterday like an embarrassment." "This is about protecting our reputation, our financial standing," Roland snapped. "Do you know what it will do to my business if people think the Sampang family can't be trusted with money?" Grandpa spoke with quiet authority I'd rarely heard. "Get out." The words cut through tension like a blade. Roland blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "Get out of my workshop, off my property, and don't come back until you're ready to treat me with the respect I deserve as your father." "Dad, you don't understand." "I understand that you see money where others see ministry. You measure worth in dollars instead of deeds. You're more concerned about protecting your reputation than protecting your father." Roland's face flushed red, but Marissa restrained him. "We're trying to help you, Elias. If you won't let us, you'll deal with consequences alone." "Fine," Grandpa replied simply. "I will." After they left, Grandpa sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 83 years. "They know," he said quietly. "They don't know what, but they know something. What do? We protect what needs protecting, and make sure it serves its intended purpose, no matter what they try." That evening, Lydia texted, "Can you meet me at the church? There's something you need to see." I found her waiting by the side entrance with a flashlight and nervous expression. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about the missing money and your grandfather's secrets. I think I know where to look." She led me to the church's east wing, to a door marked "Storage, Authorized Personnel Only." This area was part of the 1990s renovation, but never finished, she explained. Most people forget it exists. I used the brass key. Inside, past old Christmas decorations and broken pews, was a professional-grade safe built into the foundation wall marked St. Augustine's Church Future Fund. Below the combination dial, someone had etched 1968 in tiny script, the year the church was founded. The lock opened on the first try. Inside were manila envelopes containing decades of financial records, architectural plans, contractor estimates, and a sealed envelope marked "For the Right Hands." The letter inside was in Grandpa's handwriting. "This money in this account belongs to God and this congregation. It is not for personal gain or monuments to human pride, but for genuine needs of this church and community. Use it wisely, use it humbly." Lydia photographed everything. "Cedrick, your grandfather created an endowment. With 20 years of compound interest, this has grown into something truly significant. We need to tell Pastor Reeves, but first, we need to protect this. If my father challenges this legally—" "Tomorrow is Sunday," Lydia said. "If we present this to the congregation during service, make it public knowledge, it becomes much harder for anyone to interfere." As we secured everything, I felt excitement and fear. We were about to reveal a decades-old secret that could transform the church, but doing so would put me in direct conflict with my family. "What if this tears the family apart?" I asked. "Sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrifice," Lydia replied. "Your grandfather understood that, and I think you do too." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. The sanctuary filled quickly. Word had spread about yesterday's drama. My parents sat grimly in their usual pew, while Grandpa sat in back, now joined by several supporters, including Deacon Harold. During announcements, I stood up. "I'd like to say something about my grandfather and a gift he gave this church that most of you have never heard about." I pulled out copies of the financial documents. For over 20 years, my grandfather has been quietly contributing to a fund to secure this church's future. That fund now contains enough money to complete the 2001 expansion, establish community programs, and ensure St. Augustine's serves this community for generations. That's when my father stood up. "Stop right there, Cedrick." The silence was deafening. "I'm afraid my son is sharing unverified information about financial matters currently under legal review," Roland announced. "As of yesterday, I've initiated proceedings to have my father declared financially incompetent. All his assets are frozen pending investigation." The congregation gasped. I stared in shock. "You did what?" Grandpa's voice carried from the back, stronger than I'd heard in years. "I'm protecting you, Dad," Roland replied, eyes never leaving mine. That's when Deacon Harold stood up. "Roland Sampang, you should be ashamed of yourself." Harold's voice shook with emotion. "I worked with your father during the renovation. I saw him pour his heart, soul, and savings into this building. Your father is a hero, and if you can't see that, you don't deserve to call him family." Others began standing. Mrs. Henderson with tears streaming, Mr. Patterson, even younger families. The applause started slowly, but built into something thunderous. Roland stood frozen, face flushed with embarrassment. The congregation's judgment was clear. Pastor Reeves took the pulpit. "Mr. Sampang, Elias, would you please come forward?" Grandpa rose, but this time Harold and Mrs. Henderson helped him walk to the front, past his defeated son in the aisle. "This church owes you a debt that can never be repaid," Pastor Reeves said simply. "We accept your gift with gratitude and humility." The applause seemed endless as my grandfather finally received the recognition he'd never sought but always deserved. 3 weeks later, Roland's legal challenge had collapsed once the church board documented the trust fund's legitimate purpose. My father had left town with Marissa, leaving only a note about reassessing family priorities. The church board established the Elias Sampang Community Fund for the expansion and ongoing programs. Ground would break next spring on the new education wing. Other secrets emerged: anonymous medical bill payments, scholarships, emergency funds for struggling families, all traced to a man who believed the best gifts were given in secret. "I've been thinking about legacy," Grandpa said, working on a small wooden cross in his workshop. "I used to think legacy was about buildings and bank accounts, but legacy isn't what you build with your hands, it's what you build in people's hearts." I accepted my familiar cup of terrible coffee, some things never changing. "You stood up for what was right," he continued. "You chose truth over family loyalty, principle over convenience. That's the kind of legacy that matters." I found myself managing the community fund, working with Pastor Reeves to ensure wise use of resources. The wooden box remained on the shelf, no longer locked, now containing letters from helped families, construction photos, and records of every dollar spent. It had become what Grandpa intended, not a repository of secrets, but a testament to quiet service and faithful stewardship. Months later, as I locked the workshop, I reflected on the lesson learned. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, through sacrifice, humility, and courage to stand for what is right, even when it costs everything. Some legacies are measured in dollars and buildings. The best ones are measured in values they inspire and lives they change. Elias Sampang's legacy would endure long after the last dollar was spent, because the greatest gifts can't be bought or sold. They can only be earned, given, and passed from one generation to the next. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.